Good morning. Welcome back to our study in the fourth gospel, or as you know it, the gospel according to John. Before I begin, I want to call attention to a particular translation of John 8:38. That's by Professor Ann Nyland in her Source New Testament. I'll just give you the previous verse, then I'll tell you where I'm going to start examining something. She says, "Know that you are Abraham's children. Yet you are trying to kill me because you haven't made room for my word." And then here's the text. Well, actually, both texts. "I'm telling you what I perceive from my Father, and you are doing what you heard from the Father." Now, if you have a Bible, you're going to want to open that up. You're going to want to look at this particular translation, New International, King James, this, that, and the other. Just so you're aware, this is a very challenging text for an interpreter on a number of levels, because the large question here is, who is the Father that everyone claims to be listening to? That's the real question in this text. Who is this God that people claim to listen to? And who does Jesus think he is, coming in and saying that he's got the angle on God? Who does he think he is? You see. Welcome, everybody. See folks joining. Super. We're looking at John 8 today, and we'll start to dip into John 9 just a touch. Okay, so when Ann Nyland comes to this, it's fascinating to me because in this text, they've claimed they're Abraham's descendants. They've never been slaves. Jesus says the Son belongs to the house. The Son can set you free. You know, he's trying to tell them he's the Son of the Father. They're not hearing this. They're not having this. They've got Moses. They've got Abraham. In a minute, they're going to bring in the prophets. I mean, they've got this lineage. You know, they've got Calvin. They got Luther. They got Irenaeus. They got Billy Graham. They got all kinds of dead saints in this lineage. Man, everybody's got dead saints in their lineage. Some have MLK, whatever. You know, everybody's got dead saints in their lineage. They're looking back to, they're going, we learned God from this. Jesus looks at him, and he's okay. Let's check this out. So, and she translates the verb in verse 37, know that you are Abraham's children. I frankly don't see that at all. It's oida hoti sperma Abram esta. I know that you are Abraham's seed, but you seek to kill me. I don't know how she turns that into a pair of know that you are Abraham's children. I have no idea. And yet you are trying to kill me because you haven't made room for my word. And then she says, the translator translates verse 38, ha ego oraka para to patri laloka humes un ha ikosate para to patros poita. She translates this, I am telling you what I perceived from my Father, and you're doing what you heard from the Father. And then there's this little footnote, and Anne says, taking poita as an imperative, and both instances of Father is referring to God, as there are no possessive pronouns. I get that. Both, you're dealing here with the Father. You don't have any my Father, your Father. You don't have any possessive pronouns here. And you do have Jesus somehow saying, I know you are Abraham's children. I get this lineage thing. I get this election thing. This whole way you view yourselves in terms of human history. I get all this. He's acknowledging that. And he says that he's seen something, para, same preposition used in John 1. It says, she translates this as, I'm telling you what I have perceived from my Father. It's the same preposition that's used in John 1:1, where Jesus is para. The logos is para, God, para tos theon, just boom. And then you have also in this particular text, when she says she translates as an imperative, she doesn't, because she turns around and translates as a present active. You are doing. So I want to suggest a little emendation to Ann Nyland's translation here. I just want to have, I know that you are the seed of Abraham, but you seek to kill me. For my word is not within you. What I have seen with the Father, together with the Father, I speak. What you've heard from the Father, do. That's the imperative. Do it. What I see with my Father, I'm telling you, and what you've heard, do it. There's the imperative, and I think that makes much better sense in terms of translation. Okay, as we move forward now, 39 and following. Remember, it's very key to remember this. Late first century, synagogal setting, intra-Jewish debates about who Jesus is. And this writer is remembering back to his own personal encounters with Jesus and the crowds and different things. This fella has an awareness of Jesus. Let me try and do this a different way. You know, people somehow think that these early witnesses all knew Jesus the same way. I'm reading a book right now by Cynthia Haven called Evolution of Desire, just published by University of Michigan State Press. Bill Johnson's the editor of that excellent series they're publishing. At any rate, Evolution of Desire. And Cynthia lived in Stanford and knew the Renees in Renee's later years. And she has done a massively excellent bit of research here and kind of given us it's a biography in a way. It's not your classic kind of biography that you'd expect, and it omits a lot of things. There's a lot of, for me, there's still a lot missing. We need a critical biography, and I believe that Benoit Chantre is writing that. We do need a critical biography, but this piece by Cynthia Haven's wonderful because she knew Rene. Now, I've known Rene, I knew Rene, I should say, since, 1990, so for 25 years, till he passed in 2015. Wow, time flies. And had my encounters with Rene and conversations with Rene and Martha, I mention this because many others did too. So there's a lot of living persons that knew Rene on one level or another, to one degree or another, in different ways. You see what I'm saying? Okay. Now, the reason I mention this is when Anne is writing her book, there's a lot in that book that just, yeah, that resonates with me. That's the Rene I know. You see what I'm saying? That's the Rene I know. I learned some things, had some things clarified for me that I've only known in conversations with Rene. I've kind of known the summary, and in sections of the book, Cynthia has really expanded my knowledge of that and helped me to really see some things much more clearly. So when I say this is that you go to different folks that knew Girard. You go to Sandy Goodhart or Andrew McKenna. You can go back to Cesario Bandera. You can go to Bruce Chilton. You can go to Diana Culbertson or Martha Reinecke or anybody that knew Rene. And in one way or another, there's going to be a congruence in how we all knew Rene, but there is going to be extraordinary differences in the things we remember about Rene. Okay, my memories of Rene, you know, they're the things that my brain has selected out, you know, and conversations and things. And in one sense, I think I can say, I mean, there are exceptions, of course, where something that Rene said was so stunning I memorized it, but in a sense I couldn't really tell you anything that Rene said in conversations. I can tell you what we talked about, what I sensed and felt, things that were important, but I never really recorded anything. But I knew his mind, and I knew his person, and I sought to be faithful to that in what I do. Well, it's the same thing with this writer. And by the way, when I was in seminary in the 1980s, I discovered the same thing with Bonhoeffer. I met personally well over, I don't know, it was at least a dozen, probably closer to 17 or 18 of Bonhoeffer's former pupils or family members. They came through the seminary. The professor that I went to study with, Burton Nelson, there at North Park, really was developing this whole oral history, and he was bringing these Bonhoeffer students to the States for these tours, and they always came to North Park. They always stayed there, and I was always invited because I was his Bonhoeffer student. So I got to know a lot of Bonhoeffer's pupils and family members, and I had millions of questions about Bonhoeffer with these folks, and there were a lot of very different views of Bonhoeffer amongst his students and pupils in the early 1980s. I mean, they're dredging up memories 50 years old now, right? You know, Bonhoeffer was doing his work in the 20s, 30s, and until he was killed by the Gestapo in April of 45. So all these Bonhoeffer family members and students, they have different takes. Dieter Zimmermann was a journalist. Dieter took like incredible notes, very different than witness than say somebody like Mechler or Koch, you know. A very different style of person. I mean, Werner Koch, when we sat down, he just was amazingly helped really familiarize me with the Finkenwalde period, because he took that in. He's got a bit of pietist in him, you know. Not Dieter. Dieter did not like that at all. Dieter Zimmermann, you know. But he was much more interested in giving a good historical context for what Bonhoeffer was doing as a journalist. And they had these different views of Bonhoeffer. It's the same thing with the gospel writers, my friends. Now, I do not think that the synoptics, any of the synoptics, are written by an eyewitness to Jesus' ministry. But I do think the fourth gospel is. So in that sense, I'm totally out of step with New Testament scholarship, who wants to just totally relegate the fourth gospel to the dustbin of theology. It's useless for history. And who want to build their Jesus out of the synoptics, this Che Guevara Jesus out of the synoptics, you know, this kind of revolutionary Jesus, this Jesus that's all about economics and politics and sociology and all the things we're interested in. We always find in Jesus, and they managed to create this figment of their imagination, this Jesus of the Jesus seminar, this political Jesus, this Jesus that somehow, if you're conservative, he's a capitalist. If you're liberal, he's a socialist or a communist. I mean, it's amazing that what we do, we turn around and try and create Jesus in our own image, and we're so dumb this way. Same thing's happening in our text. The interlocutors have created God in their own image. And Jesus has to disabuse them of that. So the one thing that is the hardest thing for us to do is to acknowledge that the God in whom we believe or do not believe is a figment of our imagination. Yeah, that's the tough task. Because all of us, if we know God, we want to think that we know the true living God. And all of us that are certain there is no God want to be certain that we know there is no God. We trust ourselves. And we are as a species, look at us, people. Come on, for crying out loud, look at us. Here we are, 2018, destroying the planet. My God, there's a size of plastic in the Pacific Ocean, twice the size of the state of Texas. Fish are ingesting all of these microplastic particles. I hope you don't like your tuna and these things for too much longer, because we're destroying the oceans. Just destroying them, putting our nuclear radiation in them, our garbage in them. We're just destroying them. We're ruining Earth Mother's skin with all of our deforestation and mining and just the things that we do to the earth to just pollute the incredible massive amounts of toxins that are being pumped into rivers and streams all over the world by corporations that don't give a shit. As long as they're having their steaks and their barbecues and their Cabernet Sauvignons on the back porch of their $1 million mansions, they don't care. We're not that evolved, are we? Look at us. Look at us as a species, what we're doing to each other. God, look at the Christian church in America. It's cannibalizing itself. It's eating itself alive, right and left, killing each other. Those on the right killing those on the right that don't utter the shibboleth. The left's killing those on the left that don't utter the shibboleth. And the rest of us sitting out here and we're going, man, where's Jesus in all this? That's the same story is happening in this text, see? That's what's happening here. And this writer late in the first century. I don't know, if Johnny T. Robinson is correct, it could be early in the 70s. Again, the writer has and knows the Markan story and framework. So that doesn't happen until, of course, 70, unless there is some kind of real strong oral tradition in Rome that's going to influence the writer of Mark, and the writer in Ephesus knows all about this, and I doubt all that. That doesn't happen. But he is writing here, remembering not only what happened to Jesus, but seeing the correlations to his own time. And if we're really on the ball, we're going to see the same to our time too. Chapter 8 is not a chapter for liberals. If you're of a liberal progressive persuasion, this chapter is going to eat you alive. And you're going to end up in the same place as the interlocutors. You're going to think Jesus is nuts, or the writer's crazy. That's what you're going to do. You're going to go, this is literary fiction to begin with, and I don't have to believe it, and it's all made up bullshit and legend and propaganda, and this writer didn't know it. We don't know who he is. It's late. It's Gnostic. You haven't done any thinking about this fourth gospel if you're even thinking in that way. You haven't entered into it. It just shows how slow you are to listen. That's all it shows. And I don't care if you got a PhD behind your name or a double PhD behind your name. Don't be an ass. Open your ears. Open your eyes. Abraham is our father, they said. Jesus said, if you were Abraham's children, then you would do the things that Abraham did. But as it is, you want to kill me. I don't recall Abraham trying to kill anybody, do you? As it is, you want to kill me, a person who has told you the truth that I heard from God. Abraham didn't do such things. Now, isn't this an interesting take here? Jesus turns around, you're doing the deeds of your father. Now, he's already said, if you were really Abraham's children, you would do the deeds of Abraham, and because you're not doing the deeds of Abraham, you're not children of Abraham. He is not your father. You have another father. That's what's happening here. You are doing the deeds of your father. Here comes the first slur. Here's the ad hominem, because we're going to get another one here real shortly. 1, we're not illegitimate and unfaithful to God. Those are two different charges. First, charge of illegitimacy. There's been a fair amount written in the last 20 years or so, 25 years, maybe even a little longer, that Jesus was the product of a rape. And that's certainly possible. I mean, Jane Schauberg's work, I have 4 or 5 volumes I know that I've used over the years that explore arguments related to this. Whether or not you believe in a Joseph Mary thing, a virginal conception thing, whether you perceive the Matthean and Lucan birth narratives to be covering up a rape, particularly the Matthean narrative. The fact is, there is a charge of illegitimacy that does seem to stick to Jesus. Again, whether, here's Mary, everybody knows Mary, and all of a sudden, like, she's pregnant, and then, like, she tells Joseph a little while later, and then all of a sudden, they're getting married, and then boom, here's baby Jesus, real quick. Everybody knows she got pregnant beforehand. Now it's a question of paternity, because, so that could be where the charge of illegitimacy stems from, still a virgin birth and all that. If you have to have that, it's still there. The charge of illegitimacy, thus, stems from that kind of scenario. However, it's also possible that we're dealing with a rape scenario that has been covered up. Joseph, being the righteous man he is, takes Mary in as his own, yada, yada. You have that whole way of looking at things. You certainly have the Girardian approach to those virgin birth texts, by the way, which is to acknowledge that the God in the text is doing something quite different than gods in other texts do when they engage women. The God of Scripture does not rape. Mary consents. And so, at any rate, here's the charge of illegitimacy. You're illegitimate. Now, again, to get into the temple, You had to be able to like show papers. It's not quite like today. I mean, you have to have your names registered, and if you weren't known, then you had to have a male sibling, an older male sibling in the family system vouch for you and this kind of thing. And evidently, people know that there's trouble with Jesus' paternity. So the charge, you're illegitimate, is a charge that's been hurled at him his whole life. Okay? You're illegitimate. And they go on, you are unfaithful to God. This is, for me, strange, that they should find his signs. Remember, we so far have 4. We're approaching the 5th. They should perceive these signs as a threat to their system. But again, as we've shown, all these signs are bringing together 2 major themes: creation and temple. Creation, atonement. Water, blood. That's all through this. Spirit, water, blood, spirit. You just see this being woven through this. We're not illegitimate, unfaithful to God. The only Father we have is God. That's their counterclaim. Jesus has said, you have a different Father. They're going to say, the only Father we got's God. G-O-D, period, end of story. Now Jesus comes and he says in verse 42, if God were your Father, you would have loved me. And the implication is, you don't. I've come from God, and I'm here now. I haven't come on my own initiative. God sent me. Now, let's take a little look at this claim. If God were your Father, you would love me because I came from God. In fact, I didn't just come from God. God sent me. I didn't choose to do this. It's a mission here. And why don't you understand what I'm saying to you? I'll tell you why. It's because you're not willing to listen to my message. And there it is. There it is. Why is it that people don't understand what Jesus is saying? Because they don't want to listen. Friends, what we want to do with Jesus is we want to get him on our side, and we create these little things called Christologies. And these Christologies look a lot like us. The right-wing Christology in American Protestant Christianity looks a lot like right-wing Christians. And the left-wing Christology of progressive Christianity looks like a lot like a wild gooser. Know what I mean? Okay? And neither side wants to listen to Jesus' message. Neither side wants to hear about the gospel and the epistemological change and shift the gospel makes, the conversion the gospel requires, the recognition that at the heart of the gospel is the problem of violence and sacred violence, and that the solution is forgiveness, not vengeance and retribution and retaliation. The left does not want to hear the gospel. Don't let them seduce you. Don't let them think that, make you think they're out there somehow marching with Jesus. They're not. They're marching to their own Jesus, just as the conservatives do. They're all figments of imagination because no one wants to listen to the message. Everybody wants to say, oh, Jesus said love one another. Love. Let's love one another. Just don't be, No. Forgiveness is the heart of the Christian message. It is the way to mend the relationship without blood. That's the new order. No conservative wants that. It blows their whole eschatology right out of the water. They believe they've prayed the sinner's prayer and believe the right things. They're going to heaven when they die. Amen? Can I get a witness? Hallelujah. Yeah, we're the elect, the 144,000. Those who've got that little ticket. Liberals do the same thing. They don't want Jesus. He screws with their eschatology because they've got everybody included in their inclusion except for voters for Trump. Voters for Trump, there's a special place in heaven called hell for those people. And the reason we know that is because we get to treat them like that here. Well, hey, the right wing treats the left with contempt. The left treats the right with contempt. And we're all doing this in the churches in the name of Jesus. Somebody help me out here. See what I'm saying? So This text poses a real problem because Jesus is making an exclusive claim. God sent him. Now, of course, in the so-called historical Jesus research, we see the same theme, don't we? You can look at Ben Meyer's The Aims of Jesus, N.T. Wright's Jesus and the Victory of God. You can look at Jeremias's New Testament Theology, Volume 1. You can look at Martin Engel's Charismatic Leader and His Followers. There are many, 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 many books that recognize that there is a sense that Jesus has agency from God in the historical Jesus literature. No different here. Same claim. But they don't want to hear this. They don't want to hear this because the claim is going to go slightly further than any of them like. Why don't you understand what I'm saying to you? I'll tell you why. It's because you're not willing to listen to my message, and then he's going to really nail home why they don't want to hear this message that he's got. You belong to your father. This is Ann Nyland's translation. Slanderer, capital S, hyphen, liar, capital L. She translates diabolos, not devil, but slander, capital S, slander, hyphen, capital L, liar. Slanderer, liar. You belong to your father, slanderer, liar. And you want to carry out your father's desires. Now, friends, here we are, a most extraordinary text. And you already know, everything is about imitation. I see with my Father things and I speak. You hear and you do. The Father sends me. I do what the Father tells me. You do what your Father tells you. This is all about imitation, isn't it? Imitation of one of two things, and only one of two things. The true and living God, or the false God that we've created, known as slanderer, liar. The God that we fear. You belong to your father, slanderer, liar, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer right from the start. What's he talking about? Well, obvious. He's talking about Romulus and Cain. He's talking about creation myths, originary founding murder myths, isn't he? He's saying that the origin here matters because the end result stems right from the origin. Who they are and how they're behaving comes right from the one that's truly their father. And their father is not Abraham, who's mentioned in chapter 12, Genesis chapter 12. No, you got to go back a little further than that. And Jesus is saying, you think you belong to Abraham. All you Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, you all claim to go back to Father Abraham. I got news for you. You go back to your father, slanderer, liar, Hodiabolos, and Adama and Kana, Adam and Cain. He was a murderer right from the start. He doesn't rely on the truth because there's no truth in him. There's no truth in slanderer, liar. You have to understand this. Even when slanderer, liar tells a truth, it's not truth because of who it comes from. Truth is only ever spoken to be used and manipulated and abused. Now, I mean, look at our entire justice system today. Is not about truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, because you get on the witness stand, you go to speak your truth, and you're cut off by the attorneys or the judges who say, we didn't ask that question. But they want the whole truth, but they don't want the context which creates the whole truth. They just want the little answer to their question so they can manipulate and say, you said this and this and this and this. There's no interest in truth. How wonderful. Our philosophical post-modernity system is the same as our justice system, is the same as the way we look at texts and religion and everything else in the gospel. We look at everything and we go, does any of it really matter? We are so Nietzschean. We are so nihilistic. We are so pessimistic. We are, folks, overbought and overdone as a species. We're burnt. We need this more than anything else. We need to understand that there is light in the darkness. There is death, life in death. There is hope in despair. There is water in the desert. There There is food for life, not just bread, not just money, not just a welfare check, not just food stamps, not just all the things the liberals want to give to the poor, and not just great big feasts and $1,000 bottles of wine. Life is life, but you get it all wrong if you think bread isn't for the whole person. There's more bread out there in my backyard with the birds singing and the squirrels playing and the rain gently falling than there is in a rich person's refrigerator. Jesus said to them, you belong to your father, Ho diabolos, slanderer, liar. He was a murderer. When he tells a lie, he's speaking in his native tongue because he's a liar and the father of lies. You know, this again is the hard part. One of the things that Girard has been accused of is a kind of a privileged position where it appears as though he's standing outside saying when you look at religion a certain way, you're deceived. Here's the thing about self-deception. This is truly astonishing. By the way, Dan Ovia Jr. about 30 years ago wrote a phenomenal little book on self-deception in the Gospel of Matthew. Self-deception works like this. When you accuse the other of self-deception, you cannot be sure that you're not self-deceived. And that's the problem with accusing another of self-deception. Then there's the problem of, oh, well, am I self-deceived? And then you start the whole Cartesian cycle, don't you? Until you get down to extreme doubt, I think, therefore I am, aha, I think I'll become a modernist. And then eventually a postmodernist, because you realize that there's no certainty. But you're still in the air, and it's better to be there than nowhere, I suppose, if you're postmodern. The gospel is the only place that shows us the truth about us. And what it asserts about us as a species is that we are caught in a web of lies and death. That is, the two things that is the Satan, the deception of Genesis 3 and the murder of Genesis 4, belong together in the Genesis founding murder myth. They're all of a piece. When your doctrine of original sin stays with Genesis 3, you can do all kinds of theological gymnastics and ignore culture and let the world go its own way, and you can not give a damn. But when you connect Genesis 4 to Genesis 3 in your doctrine of where things went wrong, now you're talking about the founding of civilization. Now you're talking about human culture. Now you're talking about movies, art, film, literature, everything that we produce, technology, science. You're talking about the whole lock, stock, and barrel, kit and caboodle, this thing we know as civilization. Arises from blood, death, murder, deception, the essential components of scapegoating. And Girard's thesis right here is in a nutshell in these verses. And he has, the Johannine writer has Jesus going right back to this point to be able to say, when you reject my message, remember the logo, John 1:9, the Logos comes into the world doesn't know him, and his own people, paralaben, they cast him out. The message is rejected, the gospel is rejected. Again, we saw in John 6, the whittling down from the multitudes down to just a few. By the majority, by the religious authorities. They don't want it. It would cost them too much. They're invested in their God, their religion, their sacrificial God in one way or another, and it doesn't matter whether conservative or liberal, Catholic or Protestant, Anabaptist, Orthodox, postmodern, modern, ancient, it doesn't matter. We, my friends, are the ones that are asleep in the pods in the matrix. And right here in this text is Morpheus is Jesus saying, here is your chance. Take a pill, take a chance, take a risk. But we don't want to do it because, like the interlocutors, we'd rather believe that Jesus isn't who he says he is. And then he says, because I'm telling you the truth, you don't believe me. Which of you can expose me for sinning? Since I'm telling you the truth, why don't you believe me? Here, Jesus says, you know I'm innocent. Now, this is out. His innocence is out. It's up front. It's here. Who's going to accuse me of something? And they can't. The person who belongs to God hears God's words. The reason you don't hear me is that you don't belong to God. And certain Jews, or Judeans, again, I'm going to follow Bentley Hart's translation here, certain Judeans exclaimed, aren't we right in saying you're a Samaritan and you have a demon? Now, there's the second set of charges. First, he's illegitimate and unfaithful to God. Now, here's the second set of ad hominem charges. You're a Samaritan, you have a demon. There's two different things. Ann Nyland's translation has, aren't we right in saying that you're a Samaritan that has an evil spirit? I don't take the Kayan here as connective. I take it as a little disjunctive. You are Samaritan and you have an evil spirit. And it's important to note that Jesus does not address the charge that he's a Samaritan. They want to throw that epithet at him, you know. Of course, you can't do it. I suppose there are words different racial groups would abhor. Insert your own there. Aren't we right in saying that you're a blank and you're demon possessed? You know, I mean, it's a slur. Jesus doesn't refute that. Why? Because Samaritans, or I should say Samaritan Christians, happen to be behind this community as well. Remember the positive Samaritan woman story in John 4. Here we have a second reference that's going to clue us in, because we're going to get another one in John 10 with regard to the sheep of the other fold. But Jesus does not refute the charge of being a Samaritan. He says, instead, I don't have a devil. I don't have a demon. I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. I'm certainly not seeking my own honor, but there is one who's seeking and judging. It's interesting because did he not say earlier that the Father judges no one? Let me emphasize this. Anyone who holds on firmly to my word will not experience death ever. Now here's the big one. Now he's just kind of dropped the big bomb right in the middle of their playground, as it were. If you hold firmly to my logos, he says, you will never experience death. That's powerful language. I mean, that's like, imagine not having to experience this death that just once ceases to exist. Boom. Now you get to continue to exist. Now we realize you have a demon. Jesus, you are so messed up. Abraham's dead. The prophets are dead. They're our lineage, man. Are you telling us that you're greater than our lineage? Are you more important than our ancestor Abraham, who's dead, and the prophets? Who do you think you are? Now you see, you don't have this kind of discourse in the synoptics, do you? No. Doesn't mean that discourse like this didn't happen. It certainly did. I don't think would have happened quite this publicly. But I'll tell you what, for as many times in my life, if I've been asked, who do I think I am? I don't think it's a stretch of the imagination that the authorities, even historically, not just textually, even historically, want to know, who do you think you are? Jesus says, if I give myself honor, it doesn't mean anything. It's my Father, the one you claim is your God, who gives me honor. Now Jesus is just coming right back and demolishing who their Father really is. He's saying, look, my Father, the one you claim is your God, right, gives me honor. Now they're stuck because they have to either do one of two things. They have to either disassociate themselves that Jesus Father is their God, or that they're from another father. And if you haven't come to know him, but I know him, and if I said I didn't know him, I would be a liar just like you, because I do know him. However, I do know him. I hold firmly to his word. Your ancestor Abraham was thrilled to foresee my time. He saw it and was happy. He has now forced them into making a choice. Because he's saying, if God were your father, your God honors me, but you're not honoring me. So you're not of your father. So you either got to get right with your father, who's also my father and our God, or you got to recognize the father you come from, because that's who you're really acting like. Now, when he brings Abraham in, he says, Abraham, you claim Abraham is your father. Well, I'll tell you what, Abraham, a long time ago, right? He was thrilled to see my day. And they said, you're not even 50 years old. How can you say you've seen Abraham? I'll ignore the question right now of the age of Jesus and chronology and those things. Just leave that be. How can you say you've seen Abraham? Certain Jews exclaimed. Pooh, dude, like, what are you, like 1,500 years? Well, at that time would have been like, what, 1,500, 1,600, 1,800 years old? I don't know. Jesus said, let me emphasize this. And then this is Ann Nyland's translation. I have been in existence since before Abraham was born. Or the King James, as you know it, before Abraham was, I am. Now, that's actually what the text says in 58. Truly, I say to you, Prin Abram genesta egoimi. Before Abraham, I am. The egoimi here, I should at some point do a little piece on the egoimi sayings, the I am sayings in the fourth gospel. There's great literature on this, man. Barnabas Linder says some good stuff on this, and others. When Jesus makes this assertion, before Abraham was, I am, he is claiming here a divine origin. Absolutely. That's the rub. That's the piece people have more trouble with than anything. You know what I'm trying to say? It kills them. Why? Because their Jesus looks so much like them, and the God of theology looks so sick, that for them to see Jesus as divine doesn't work. It's their bad views of God. They don't allow Jesus to refrain. And so they disconnect Jesus from God, or God is so unknown. And of course, we've got to be so plural in the world and acknowledge everybody's got revelation, everybody's got truth. Okay, fine. But you still have no epistemological place from which to move or think or be. I mean, you can be so postmodern in your abstract theories, but you don't live your life that way. So they picked up stones to throw at him. There's the murder. There it is. He said they wanted to kill him. Here it comes. In the temple. They pick up stones. We'll stop here because as Jesus escapes this crowd, he's about to do something rather remarkable. But all along we've seen that the light rejects the dark, darkness rejects the light. Light comes into the darkness. Darkness can't overcome it, can't comprehend it, kills it, and still the light comes back and shines in the darkness. The world, folks, doesn't really want grace and forgiveness and truth. It really doesn't. Neither does the church. Okay? Everybody wants their piece of the pie. Everybody's in this for themselves. Let's just get that straight. Even me. And if you're in this professionally and it lines your pocketbook, trust me, the temptation is easy to start justifying everything you do and say because it affects your bottom line. Preachers preach from their wallets, not from their convictions. Theologians say and write what they're allowed to write. I know an author locally who's written some marvelous books, but the president of the school won't let her use her own books in class because it would offend the donor base. God forbid anybody out there offends their donor bases, eh? Say the wrong word at a faculty meeting and boom, you're gone. Good heavens. I'm not sure what we've come to anymore, but we are in a John 8 crisis in this country, in Christianity. And unless people are willing to acknowledge that Jesus brings something to the table nobody else brought, unless they're willing to go on the quest of a lifetime to find it and to live it, I can't say I have a lot of hope for Protestant Christianity. But on the other hand, you're listening to this. You might just be the ones that go on that quest, that want Jesus more than anything else and that want to know his Father as he did, to live his life in you and him. And if that's the case, you're going to really like John chapter 9. It's all about enlightenment. All right, man. See you next time. Bye-bye.